It's under intense scrutiny by U.S. Satellite sensors, surveillance satellites, and other sensors that can pick up communications. Iraq would also be on that list. I'm not sure that Iraq would necessarily be second, but Iraq would be on that list, given at least some signals and hints about Iraqi involvement in the previous World Trade Center bombing. Sudan could be on that list. Sudan was hit by an American cruise missile attack in 1998, along with Afghanistan, when the two bombings occurred at U.S. embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. The list is not very large, Robert. It's quite small, given given where suspicion has fallen. I'm not sure that there are any other nations beyond that.
You mentioned the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. In the end, do we know what countries were involved in that act of terrorism?
No. In fact, the authorities, when they prosecuted the 4 and ultimately 6 people for that bombing, they didn't attempt to link them to nations. There were a number of terrorism experts that did feel that the Iraqi hand was perceived in that. But the Clinton administration chose not to make that connection. Over the 8 years since the first World Trade Center bombing, the view has pretty much stayed the same. And before him, the World Trade Center bombers and Ramzi Youssef, who was believed to be the mastermind of that bombing and who's in prison now in the United States, were not acting with state sponsorship, that they were acting on their own. And the focus on bin Laden has really intensified that view that this has been something that, this has been a phenomenon that bin Laden and other independent actors have really pressed forward. I think that because of the details and the extraordinary coordination and synchronization of these acts today, it's going to push U.S. officials to focus much more on the possibility that there was state sponsorship for these acts.
Yes, it would seem that the great difference between what happened today and what happened either at the U.S. embassies or at the World Trade Center in '93 or at Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia is that these weren't trucks full of bombs that pull up in front of a building, but hijackings that involve people obviously capable of, first of all, penetrating airport security in some way with some sort of weapons, it seems, and then piloting the aircraft into their targets. Very sophisticated stuff.
It certainly seems very sophisticated, but the number of people who actually carried out these operations today could still be small. That's what terrorism experts caution. And we don't have any information about how they got on the plane with weapons that they could then commandeer the planes, whether there were arms involved or were explosives involved. So terrorism experts still caution that without further information that gives us a clearer picture of how this was done today, an ultimate conclusion can't be drawn.
It would seem from the experience of the 1993 explosion that an ultimate conclusion might not be drawn 10 years from now.
That's possible, although there was an investigation and there was a trial and there was a lot of information. And then when Ramzi Youssef was essentially kidnapped by U.S. agents from Pakistan and brought to the United States, U.S. authorities have said that he bragged about the operation and gave a good deal of detail about how he masterminded and how his people carried out the first bombing of the World Trade Center. There was also a good deal of information that's emerged about particularly at the trial this year, about the embassy bombings in Africa. And so I think U.S. officials believe that they will learn a great deal more about what took place today.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome, Robert.
Mike Schuster, NPR's diplomatic correspondent.
John Barachini is with us. He is the executive director of the Washington office of the Monterey Institute. He's writing a book about Osama bin Laden. He's the author of a report on the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993. Mr. Barachini, first of all, what do you think about the notion that this act was so sophisticated that it might actually have been state-sponsored?
I think it's a good point, and it's worth thinking about. We would have to say, however, that the World Trade Center bombing of '93 was a sophisticated act, or that the bombings of the embassies in two different countries, one right after another in 1998, was a sophisticated operation. There's no indication in either of those instances that states were party to that, but nothing should be ruled out at this moment.
Let's go back to what the president said. Was there anything that you felt was missing from that statement? Did you expect to hear something about retaliation or some presidential act?
I think the president and indeed other cabinet officials are striking just the right tone at this moment. Don't incite panic. Don't tip all the cards about what we might do next. Don't rule out any tools that might be in our counterterrorism toolbox. So I think they're doing pretty well under what are unprecedented circumstances.
The difficulty of not knowing what happened and not knowing who caused it leaves the United States in a sort of an impotent position, though, doesn't it, to have had something so dreadful happen and to have no response?
It leaves us impotent if we only think about one tool that is striking back. And indeed, that's the feeling that many Americans, I'm sure, feel this evening. This is tragic beyond imagination, and many people are angry. But I think the president and his other officials are showing the right approach. That is, we will pick our time. We will use a variety of tools, some of them diplomatic, some of them law enforcement, some of them military, some of them things that we can do on our own here in this on our own territory, improving our security at our borders, improving the air traffic security system. There are a number of things that we can do that don't involve kissing somebody with a cruise missile.
The president said that the United States will win the war against terrorism. He talked about it as a war. Do you think, did you see this as some sort of